Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Be welcome to the Public Accounts International Seminar. This event has been broadcast in the official channel for the TCU. In this seminar, it will be debated how Brazil can modernize the public accounting and increase the public cost to the citizen. For this event, you can invite the president of the TCU, the Minister Bruno Dantas.
Muito bom dia.
Good morning.
Cumprimentar
I would like to
os que estão aqui na nossa
greet all of you that are here in this virtual
e, evidentemente,
room
todos que
and
acompanham
all those that are accompanying us in this international seminar
do TCU no YouTube,
through the
canal do
TCU YouTube channel.
E quero fazer
And I would like also to greet
o meu colega de TCU,
my TCU colleague, my sub Eder de Oliveira, and also to greet the Dr. Rodrigo Medeiros.
Cumprimento o vice-presidente.
I greet the Vice President of the Rui Barbosa Institute, Renato Paixão, the TCU Secretariat for External Control, Leonardo Moraes,
Antônio Leonel,
Dr. Antonio Leonel, the Secretary of the Treasury of the Minister of Economy, Julio Alessandro Menezes da Silva, and our colleague, the General Coordinator of the Economic Area, Thiago Dutra, and also Dr. Alessandro Caldeira, the consultant of the Representatives Chamber, Elio Tolini, also Dr. Paulo Bijos, and also Dr. Leonardo Ribeiro, and also Dr. Leonel Cury, and Dr. Zé Roberto Afonso. I would like to greet all of you and I would like to facilitate Dr. De Bernardo to take this initiative to TCU that has been in this past years a stage of debating of the highest importance around this topic that's very crucial, not only to Brazil, but for all the nations, which is the fiscal rigidity, sustainability, fiscal sustainability. So that's something that I have been calling as the fundamental right that Brazilian people have, that is founded in the Constitution and the 101 law, that is the fiscal responsibility. In this morning, we have gathered several specialists to bring to the public debate some ideas, opinions, evaluations, and above all, a future perspective. Once that all the world is going through some transformations in its fiscal rules. Regarding Brazil, this is more sensible because we are approaching to our elections, general elections in Brazil. So this is it's very natural that in times of elections that the candidates make some promises, they heat up people's expectations. But it's absolutely indispensable to talk about what pillars these dreams, these hopes and promises will be built. For many years in Brazil, the debate about the fiscal responsibility has been taxed as a neoliberal debate. Fortunately, this is some past a past season, that because any person that has a good sense knows that we cannot build a public politic without a very solid accounting. So we can see that recently the president of Chile, which was taken as a militant of a left wing, when he invited his central bank president that had a dependence on the previous government, which was a right wing. So when he invited to the Minister of Economy, he declared that the left wing should stop saying that the fiscal responsibility is only one thing, one debate for the new liberal responsibility, new liberal environment. So that's a discussion that we should have all together. And Brazil, in this learning curve, this maturing that we have experienced in these past years, we can see that here, in all the dimensions of the political area. So we understand that we cannot build anything without a fiscal audit that is solid. So I underline that here in Brazil, we have coped with fiscal deficits in the budget. Fiscal rules have had a very important role to deal with the resources. Still, the fiscal rules are not enough to transform the social reality of the country. So it's true that fiscal rules they rely on those who are applying them. So we see that unfortunately is that in the past years we see a very much of a people making the fiscal rules much of the constitution. So this is a very exaggerated reality, but it's true that we should now take that into discussion with more seriousness to see whether we can advance on that. We've seen that this has been brought into discussion in several countries. When we saw the pandemic, when we saw that the pandemic was going away, we saw that the Ukraine war was coming also with a very important scenario for us too, which take us off balance in our perspectives. So, regardless of the situation, it's important to look beyond the mist. So we still are living the mist of the crisis, but when we gather together the specialists and especially those who are here with us today and that will be with us during the day and up until the last day on Wednesday 21st, I see that I have lots of hope to that good solutions will be reformulated, will be debated, and we are going to get to some consensus that will be reached. So here in this event, I was already I had lost the habit of the virtual events, so I think that we are going to count on a very good specialist for performing events like this. It was necessary to make a virtual event with all the specialists that are here because all of you have your agenda very busy, but I just let you know that the next event of this importance will be presentially. I hope that we can receive all of you in the TCU auditory so we can have your presence there. So the participants in these days will have the opportunity to follow the debates regarding the reforms in the legislation in the public finances in Brazil and regarding the controlling the regulation of the budget in Brazil too. So we all know that TCU has shown a great capacity to learn as an institution because we had some important partnerships with the LCDU, the World Bank, the International Bank, and we have improved our processes of accounting accountability in the federal accounts. So this is important to be mentioned because this consolidated the process of adoption for the audit, the governmental audit processes. So this has been an example to all the country, all the uh, financing offices in Brazil. So this is fruit of the 40 years work of the TCU to Brazilian society. In this year, as I mentioned, one more important acting is to come because this is one thing that I am very proud of mentioning because TCU has led a very important international agenda. In November, we will assume the presidency of the international organization of the institution of controlling the INTOSAI, which is a consulting body for the UN, which embraces all the countries. So Brazil will be representing at the same time a representative of the cooperation, but also helping all the countries in topics regarding the public accounts. There is a very specific committee regarding the public debt that will have discussions in this committee. Another event that represents the engagement of the TCU is the formalization of the being candidate of to help the audit join of UN, which was only possible and it will be like taking into the advantage in the next year during the UN meeting, but we can only be present in this joint that is being composed only by three countries: China, France, and Chile, that are auditing counts and problems and planning for the UN. So this mandate of Chile will expire next year. So we are candidating exactly to replace Chile next year. So we can only dare to present Brazil's name to compose this joint because we understand that our institution has attained a high maturity level in accounting audit and financial audit. So today and tomorrow we will count on good speakers, debaters that are specialists, very well named in the audit and financial governmental financial area. I would like to thank all that have accepted to be here and that help us to shine in this international seminar of public account, and I thank all my colleagues from the USA institutional of financial control, also from France, United Kingdom, and European Union, and etc. So I desire that you have a great seminar and learn a lot in this public account seminar, and I desire a very good event. And we have the joy to hear our friend, our sub-minister Eder de Oliveira, that is a very good specialist in public financing, and I thank you all. Now have the Dr. Eder de Oliveira, the sub-minister of the TCU. Good morning, everyone. I would first like to thank you and thank Minister Bruno Dantas for the organization of the event. I also congratulate the presence of the specialists here in name of Procurator Rodrigo Medeiros, Alessandro. I greet all the colleagues from the TCU, and I highlight the presence of the specialists from the uh, accounting tribunal, European accounting tribunal that from France, from Portugal, with lots of experience and experience in fiscalizing and compliance in the public accounts. This seminar is very important because with that we can start with debates along the next years with this synergy between the public accounts, the public finances, certification, the approval of the DCU. We have seen the past years that what we could call the hyper-constitutionalization of the budget, which has good aspects, but we have some other questions that should be deepened. And we also notice in the not only the past years, but along the two last decades, the hyper-regulation of the budget matter. We have been here in for many years with projects in the Senate and the representative chamber for a law of public finances, but not only that, but a regulation of more functional of our budgetary instruments. These projects have been debated for such a long time that when they go to their maturity next to the approval, they are already a little obsolete. So the more recent constitutional changes with all the discussions regarding the fiscal rules and the responsibility of the budgetary responsibility. So this constitution, even though it was widened, is not being able to take that as a responsibility. So these projects that are in the Congress need to be reviewed so they can actually embrace the new perspectives, the new ideas that are present in the fiscal rules, public finances, and how the budgetary Brazilian model should be. So this model that is already exerted. So we are looking forwards to put something in substitution and to change some norms, and that's something that we should debate in this morning with José Roberto Afonso, Leonardo Ribeiro, Hélio Tolini, Paulo Bijos, Daniel Cury, and Alessandro Caldeira, our great specialist here in the tribunal. So the other topics are of extreme relevance. The ability of the control institutions like TCU to fiscalize by digital means like IA, IE, they are looking forward to identify undue payments, especially when it involves millions of people, and when they have to involve these information in the public accounting certification. This is a great topic that the tribunal has been studying for more than a decade. We have also a long path to pursue to extract in this process all the power that we can already see in this process, and at the same time with synergy with the National Congress, we still have a long path so that the Congress can extract from this process all the utility that will still be reached. In 2017, I had the opportunity to write an article taking a reflection regarding this relationship between the TCU and the National Congress and the role of the National Congress and TCU in this discussion, analysis, retrospective of the public accounts in a previous agreement. And this article was entitled like we need to talk about accounts. So it's very thankful to see the effort the tribunal has done in this past decade to extract these potentialities, to empower this process, which is more relevant each time more for the Congress and the society. And around that, have this discussion. Nothing of it can be done if we don't start this collective work to discuss with depth uh, the the exchanges of a project that can actually bring some functionalities to the budgetary system and can extract from the new constitutional norms some ideas that can bring some perspectives of better control of the public accounts. And especially now that we have a new introduction of norms, the public accounts evaluation. It's a very complex topic, and I'm happy to start this discussion in this seminar. With the word, the General Secretariat of the TCU, Leonardo Albenas. Good morning, everyone. I would like to greet Minister Bruno Dantas, Eda de Oliveira, Procurator Rodrigo de Medeiros, all the authorities, servers of TCU, and the other bodies that are participating with us, all that are accompanying us in online, and all the participants of the international seminar that's been organized by the TCU. It's a great honor to receive these references in the public accounts. Be like we are in these next 3 days, we'll be presenting very important systems to monitor the public accounts in the countries and the work in this job. In this day, we have the opportunity to debate two topics focused on the process of the governance of fiscal policies in Brazil, which Bruno Dantas has mentioned that is very important for Brazil in this moment, and the importance of a public finance code and some politics for financial publics that are important, that need some legislative measures, and that's the role of TCU to promote this debate in such a high levels that is a great honor for us. In this afternoon, in the next panel, we'll have a public account model that has been built in the past 10 years with several reforms that the TCU has had as a initiative along with the OCDE and with partnership with the CGU and the Ministry of Economy and other institutions. In the next panels, they will talk about the international and national partnerships that are converting the work of TCU in an international level, something that Minister Bruno Dantas has already mentioned a lot, and it's regarding the control of the public expenses and from different perspectives, and taking in consideration the experience we have in Brazil, but knowing the international experience too. So tomorrow we'll have the exposition of the integrity model of payments of the United States, which will be presented by the audit financial specialist of the GEO and also from the Treasury. So they are telling the experience of the control of the payment security they have in the United States. So in the afternoon we have the successful representatives of Brazilian processes of security in the payments. So that has been led from the TCU of CGO, and especially for the people payment and the previdency and benefits in general terms. And on the third day, we have the opportunity to know the international experience in the certification of the public accounts regarding the public, the European public institution. And we received the United Kingdom representative to talk about the financial experience they have there, the account tribunal from Portugal regarding the financial transaction for public services, and also the TCU from France regarding the audit in the accounting in the international bodies, and something that is very important that TCU is trying to look for a vacancy in the audit council in the UN. So we can also learn from the France experience too, so we can share this experience in the future. So I pass these invitations to the coordination of the economy, the initiative taken by the coordinator, Thiago Dutra, all his team, from the assessors, Ana Carolina, Virginia, Josiane. I think for all the effort to make this event happen, and for all those who are with us. And I desire you all the excellent 3 days of work. Thank you very much.
Transferimos a palavra para o diretor executivo
I
da
transfer the
instituição,
word for the
Daniel Cury, que a partir deste momento conduzirá o evento.
Dr. Daniel Corey.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those who are hearing us
da Europa.
directly from Europe.
Queria agradecer em nome da instituição
I would like to thank from the independent fiscal institution the invitation to participate in this event. I greet here the President Bruno Dantas, the Minister Eder de Oliveira, the Procurator Leonardo de Oliveira, those servers from the TCU, from the Ministry of Economy, my colleagues, El Tolini, Paulo Bigis, Leonardo Ribeiro, Thiago, Leonardo Menais, all those who are here, and with no doubt have contributed a lot about the public finances in Brazil, and also the other colleagues who are accompanying us in the other countries. I expect to be here as a very fruitful event for those who have been here participating. In this first presentation, we'll talk about a proposal of a new fiscal code for Brazil. Minister Eder de Oliveira has mentioned that there is a hyper-constitutionalization in the budgetary rules. Myself and Paulo Bigis, we have talked about that, and we call that a rules inflation. There is no other chapter in the Constitution that has had so many changes, like in the past years, in the past 5 years. So I think it's very important to look very attentively to everything that's happening around the public finances.
To talk about this new proposal of fiscal code, we'll talk here José Roberto Afonso. It's an economist, economic consultant, PhD, postdoctorship, doctor and MBA, titular professor of EDP. He's an integrated researcher of the Lisbon University, and also we have the honor in the Senate institution to have as a member of technical consultancy Roberto Afonso. Also have Leonardo Ribeiro, who is the researcher from Melbourne University, graduated in economy. It's a veteran there. Over 15 years of experience in the field of public finance. He acts in the controlling of federal budget. I had the honor to work with him in 2005, and currently he's an analyst of the Federal Senate. He is one of the persons that idealized the independent controlling, which I direct currently, and has been contributing about public finances with several papers, disclosure in magazines like the TCO magazine. I think that's important to say that this is very relevant and it's urgent. We have the electoral time, and we discussed how 2023 budget is going to be, if you're going to have any changes in the rules, so we can keep the promise that have been done, the increases of expenses, the maintains of and how the fiscal rules are going to adapt on that. Maybe November and December, we are going to have an intense debate on that, so it's very opportune. I'll give the floor to Leonardo Ribeiro to start his lecture. Daniel, I'm going to make a brief comment if I can. We are about to start. Good afternoon, Minister Bruno Dantas, Bruno Weber, and all the guests. What we're going to bring in this presentation, I'm trying to share, is the proposal that we understand that the country needs a rebuild of the laws. It's not only to have a pipe with a roll and call a fireman. We need to rebuild everything again. I think that we can adapt the suggestions and to add in our work, like in the article with disclosure, and it was based in 3 pillars. The first one, in the next slide, periodic review of the fiscal expense. Several countries already had. And the digital governance allowed us, Brazil, to have an advantage related to the other countries. We are not only talk about that, I'm just giving a comment, is one of the pillars along with the public finances. And the second one, which is urgent, is to implement intergovernmental fiscal politics, which is systemic. And this role is made by the Superior Court, STF, when we need the 3 branches, along with the state executives, to adopt a systematic, organized for the fiscal politics, because the expense, like public safety, education, are in the municipality. So it's very urgent to have a coordination of these fiscal politics. And again, we're not going to talk about just a suggestion for the next day. And what I want to talk about, a proposal of this code, is to reunite code, is to systematize all the information, all the norms about some subjects, and has it in one place. Not only the consolidation, but the harmonization of the access of guidelines that we have in laws. That's we are going to talk about, so I want Leo to talk about that. That's going to bring the international scenario, and I'm going to talk about this proposal. Leo, I'm not seeing you. Okay. Thank you, Professor José Roberto Afonso. Good morning. Good afternoon for the ones in another time zone. I would like to greet initially Minister Bruno Dantas, which in behalf the other authorities, speakers, co-workers, foreign representatives, and guests. I want to highlight this initiative from TCU to promote this discussion about public accounts in an international focus. The ones who follow that subject realize that we are going to have changes. We still don't know how we are going to make that. But in the front of us, we have this electoral period, like Minister Weather Oliveira said, that shows shared understanding from another specialist that the current model is done. We need to review the rules, and I'm going to start our presentation, talk about the international experience. Next slide. Well, what the literature teaches, that the rules, the public account is income process, making expenses, governmental program design in the democracy are inserted in the guideline environment. And the rules of the game affects the behavior of the authorities, of the leaders that make decisions in this budgetary project. And what the studies indicated, this is studied from OECD to 2015. The ones that have rules that not coherent had more crises. So here we want to have more higher coherence. We need to review in Brazil an harmonization, a better organization of the rules. That's what's behind the idea of code. The specialists of OECD studied 15 federations in the sense of the expense autonomy, the accountability, what I call co-determination, how the subnational governments interfere in the fiscal politics in general governments. And in Brazil, it's a federation that states and municipalities has a very relevant participation. That indicates that Brazil has one of the biggest budgets and incoherent of the world. So we start to see in this train of thought the rules interfere, making economic crisis. In Brazil has this incoherence between the federation studied. In the most of countries in OECD, they have the legislative role in the budgetary process and the process in the financial guidelines, like Minister Weather Oliveira said, hyper-constitutionalization of the rule. Daniel Coley shows that we can see an inflation of the rule in the constitutions. And the idea, we need to deconstitutionalize this model, and that needs to be in the sense of increase to the increase of the model. We are going through these questions.
aproveitando o estudo do consultor Clay Antunes, colega nosso,
Brazil is the one who has the most higher changes in the constitution, and the time that's been going through, and it's not coherent, and we have a record in the instability of the constitution. When you quantify the number of rules that are predicted in the supplementary laws, we realize that the constitutional text has more fiscal law, like numerical laws. The constitutional text has more rules than the supplementary laws. So we start to realize that we had hyper-constitutionalization of the rules. So what's the international tendency after 2018? To strengthen the independent fiscal institution. In 2016, we established INFI to promote mechanisms for agreements, like Professor José Roberto Afonso said, in the judiciary field, could be based on the international experiences, and the institutionalization of the periodical review of the expense. So to summary, in Brazil, in this evaluation, the countries on the right has a bigger framework of the number of rules, and the vertical bar, which is longer, it indicates less coherence. Like I said, Brazil is along with Spain, Germany, Belgium, Italy, in a framework that is very big. So we have the longest vertical bar. And so we have an incoherence of the rule. So next slide. This is a very recent study from OECD by teams in the fiscal field. What the countries of OECD to regulate by normatives. The dark blue indicate what's predicted in the Constitution, what is said in the Constitution, and the main themes are the role of legislative authorization, the establishment of the Supreme Audit Institution, like the Audit Court, the role and the responsibilities of the legislature, and in the main countries that has constitutions. When you talk about the role of the executive, the disciplinary norms of the independent constitution and the medium term and the ways to organize the budgetary, that indicates it's about constitutional law. So that's why we bring this to the fiscal code. Next slide. Here is a theme that's very currently we see in the OECD material, which the role of the legislative branch in the budgetary process is the amendment of the budgetary process. We could not forget that our federal constitution, it's very well related to the literature, has very strong aspects of parliamentarism. Nowadays, the legislative branch through amendments.
uma questão para reflexão.
And I bring a question. Is this
Será que nós não estamos
bad for the democracy, or we need to bring in the rules that better qualify the role of the legislative branch in OCD?
que é uma maior participação do
It's a bigger participation of the legislative in the budgetary process.
aqui
Here,
as regras fiscais,
the fiscal rules
digamos assim, o debate, né?
that are in the debate here in Brazil can see that.
Apresenta
And the treasurer presents a proposal to have a
trazendo uma discussão
rule about that. And in this slide,
4 tipos
we have 4 types of fiscal rules, and how are they divided in the countries.
nesse gráfico
In this graphic,
percebe que
we can see in the fiscal rules,
normalmente não estão,
normally they're not
nós olhamos aí para a experiência do Sudeste.
in the constitution. That indicates that we need to take out of the constitution the framework, Brazilian framework, if you want to base on the international experience.
E para finalizar essa parte
And to end this part of the international experience, and then I'll give the floor to Professor
eu quero
Roberto about the code, I would like to once more to let this as a reflection, not to determine the way to be taken, just a reflection,
a gente percebe
just a thought. We can see that in the fiscal debates currently, there are discussions about what should prevail.
são os limites numéricos definidos
Is the numbers that should prevail? Can we have a defined parameter before the discussion of how much can be the in-depth of the government? These are fiscal rules or governance patterns, which are procedure rules called ex post. A lot of our laws is about governance and not fiscal rules. If the government see that the incomes are not going to cover the expenses, the executive branch has to limit the budget, should indicate this result, so our ex post procedure. It's not something that we can make a determination by IPC.
percebendo a diferença entre regras fiscais e padrões de governança.
And here we have the difference between fiscal rules and governance patterns.
Foi ministro de Portugal, participou de todo o processo.
Portugal minister participating all through the process in the 90s. He has the expertise,
Defende, né,
and he
constitucional baseado em regras fiscais.
defend the fiscal regime based in fiscal rules.
Já o Oliver Blanchard também
Oliver Blanchard is a macroeconomist,
criticando
are criticizing this fiscal rules model, defending fiscal politics of the fiscal management, phase 2 ex post.
e o Poder Legislativo tem maior espaço
The legislative and executive branch has more government decisions in a transparency environment in the path of the public accounts. So we have a lot of paradigms, and we realize that the accountability fiscal law has this governance subject, and is a law that has several years in Brazil, is acknowledged for the daily basis. The ones that work with that on a daily basis, know the importance of this law, what that brings for transparency. At the same time, it has fiscal rules. In this debate, we have fiscal rules and governance standards for that. We can combine the rules. So this is an international overview, which embase the presentation of Professor José Roberto about the fiscal code. I would like to thank for your attention.
Bom, vamos lá, gente. Continuando aqui,
So following
onde que o Léo parou,
where Leo stopped,
o Brasil não seguiu um modelo ou outro, tá adotando
Brazil did not have a model. We go through the two paths.
lá atrás há 20 anos, lá atrás há mais de 50
About
anos.
20 years ago, 50 years ago, so that's an opportunity for us to turn back and innovate in our rebuild. Now I'm going to talk very quickly.
Já foi muito comentado aqui.
It was very common, Daniel highlighted in your speech,
A inflação das regras,
the
né, das normas,
inflation of the constitutional guidelines about constitutional matters.
1988, se olhar ali só
1988, just the public finances chapters,
100
it's go through 67 to 109. We're talking about that it changed a lot and a high number of rules.
que faz com paradoxo.
And that's a problem. It's a paradox.
Emenda constitucional,
And we make a constitutional amendment is when you do not trust the ordinary legislation, you do not trust that your interests are in the infra-constitutional laws. And that pushes you to have more
agora
matters in the Constitution. And the paradox is that the more we have subjects in Constitution,
mas como aqui a
the more
feita pelo Daniel, pelo Bijos, que vai falar em seguida, fica disfuncional.
it's dysfunctional,
Disfuncionalidade.
dysfunctionality.
E da inconsistência entre as normas.
And the inconsistencies
Na sua execução no dia a dia, quem está no controle, conforme, né, o TCU.
the TCU.
Honestamente, a impressão que me dá é
The impression that I have is that when we have an amendment, we do not look at the Constitution. We treat the amendment,
a atual recorrente.
the current
Não emendar, e sim
writing technique of the Constitution. And when we put a new rule in the Constitution, I think that this act is not a fail act.
mas sem eu colocar essa nova
To
norma, você
put
tá
this
dizendo
new rule,
que eu estou ignorando
I'm ignoring the previous law. And these laws are still
os slides seguintes.
happening. So the next slide confirmed that what we said,
A regra
we have to remind the general rule, not only fiscal
é a Constituição que tem a maior média.
laws. We have the highest average. We have some condition of the close countries. The study made by Clay Antunes. We have the Constitution of 1981, which is the longest constitution.
Ao mesmo tempo, temos
And we have a process of amendment that's very impressive of this constitution. The next slide, we can see that a lot of these amendments in the recent period are resulting in the fiscal matters. Here in this chart about
contar com matérias fiscais.
budgetary rules,
Não só o número de dispositivos.
not only the number of the dispositives,
Se a gente for olhar,
as Daniel said, like if you look beyond the
muita coisa
budgetary rule, we have a lot of public finances spread in the constitutional text and in the ADT. We have more constitutional rules, and some of that laws, supplementary laws, are very old.
pouco algumas até pouco
Some of
curiosas.
them,
O número de resoluções
the number of
judiciais é
laws
menor
about
do que o resto.
fiscal
Isso é verdade, o Congresso
matters, it's
tratando da
lowest
matéria
because
não
the
por
Congress
resolução,
is
e
not
sim pela
talking about
sua
with the
norma maior,
resolution,
que é
but by this bigger
o
law,
caso
which
mais
the
constitucionalization.
constitutionalization.
Vou até pular rápido no slide seguinte, é a questão da
The
limitação,
case of the
variação do
limitation
gasto público federal,
of the federal
não
expense.
é um teto de gasto, é um teto de
It's
variação
not
do
the
gasto.
roof of the expand. It's not only the size. From 2016, 2017,
Elevou a base, você já tem aí
the government elevate the basis, so we have a series of amendments.
seja esse que altera implicitamente como que a gente
And
viu
it was
recentemente. Quer
implicit,
dizer, eu emendo
as we saw.
e depois eu desemendo.
I amendment and then I de-amendment. So it's a process. And another issue that we need to face in the next slide is the
Tampão que a gente tem, que é a LDO,
temporary law, like
faz
the
tudo menos tratar de
LDO
diretrizes orçamentárias,
about
né?
budget.
Aliás, o escopo dela não para de ampliar.
The scope is very wide.
Né? Até
We can compare that
2022, se fosse pegar
2000
a
through
primeira
2022. The first LDO, the law
relatou lá em 1989,
that, like in 1989, where I have the opportunity to work with,
provavelmente você multiplica
probably if you can, we multiply by 10 because part of the federal law
própria da lei complementar
is the
orçamento, contabilidade.
supplementary law about
Fazer esforço para
finances.
complementar, eu fico emendando ali.
I'm always amendment the LDOs. It's very practical, it's easier, it's a ordinary law. I'm just like repeating that and increasing that. It's like the budgetary process. You don't have the security of amount. It does not apply to states and municipalities, only in the federal LDO.
Fazer projeto, né, de uma
We need to make a rebuild project.
até não vou falar porque Tolini vai abordar
Tolini is going to talk about that,
do processo orçamentário.
about this budgetary process.
Lá, na verdade, a gente precisa olhar
We need to look
finanças públicas
to the public finances as a whole.
até mesmo a tributação faz parte
The
das finanças públicas, mas
taxations are part of this process, and sometimes we take it outside, but we have to put that in a code.
o Brasil tem
Brazil has
disso, você tem o Código
technology, the civil, the criminal code.
que foi esquecido, né? Depois você sai aprovando leis.
We have supplementary laws and do not come back to the codes.
Volto a insistir.
With the idea of the code,
Só colocar
it's us not only consolidate in the sense of add all the matters in just one place, but to give coherence and consistency to them. That, I think,
maior que nós temos
is the biggest problem that we have nowadays. Not only
matéria no texto
put
constitucional, é que você
a lot of matter in the constitutional
cada vez mais incoerente e inconsistente.
theme, but it's incoherent and inconsistent
Não precisamos nem dizer
in that.
se usa termos
We use in the constitutional
a despesa pública e você não tem nenhum cuidado de
public
colocar a lei
expense. We have the law,
básica, né, de contas,
the basic law,
que é despesa ou
where it says what's expense or the public debt. We define that in supplementary laws.
uma coisa ficou lá na
Some of that is the LRF law. When we work with that, the idea was this law that should be parallel to
de contas, lei
of general account law.
o Léo já adiantou aqui,
As Leo said, the LRF do not
não só do
say anything about the budgetary
se fixa lá algumas
guidelines. It's just a concept law, and our purpose is to repeat
em várias
the experience that we have in other matters and consolidate this fiscal matter beyond the budgetary, has to talk about financial, the assets in just one document, so we have more transparency and we can have a better harmonization between the branches. And just to end my speech, the most important is the debate that the legislative process of the code is very curious. It's more difficult to approve the code.
Even though after the code is approved, you can change this code more easily than an amendment. But there is a whole right between in the code, in the ruling of the National Congress, in vigency. You need the commission installation, and above all, you can only have only 2 projects of code being transmitted at the same time in each house. We need quorum, qualified quorum, but the regulation is smarter than what has been. Despite it is a Congress regulation, because it eliminates and demands the majority to approve the code. Well, there are some things in vigency, like the consumer protection code is in vigency. It's a code, but despite it has gone through the Senate, it didn't have the vision tramitation. So our proposal in the next slide is that, above all, it's not only the relative topic, but we need to make a political pact around to define what are the rights and the norms, the minimal norms in the public finances, so we can elaborate a initial project. And this project, in my opinion, of code, from the constitutional text, we can transpose the matters that are scattered in the constitutional text that is permanent and transitory, and you can take all of that and put in the same place. We have 2 ways. You can take everything and put, and then after that you order that and you approve this communitary law, and then you order it and taking away all the things that are not necessary. First, so the order in the legislative process can be first, you approve first the code and then you do the order on it. And it can fit on the 63 article regarding the finance public norms, which is the idea of the José Serra. But the relator said before that you cannot just write codes, constitutional codes. So that became a complementary law for public finances. So that was increased in this 163 article, and anticipating in the constituent some process that we have today. So coming back, okay, so it's important. We are not going to solve this here, but we can take all these matters and harmonize them in terms of looking for correcting some inconsistencies and what are contradictory, and also putting aside all the budget process that needs also a complementary law. So, in my opinion, I think that this project should start from the constitutional text, and after you take what you have from the LRF and what you have from the 4,320 law, and putting them together. So we can consolidate general laws, not specific laws. The general laws are the ones that are good for the union, the states, and the counties, and they are general precepts. So I think that here we can dry off this process because we have matters that are not general norms, they are specific norms, and we can even have a specific code for each government. But last of all, when going towards the end, I would like to say that Brazil has a history of innovation, good innovations in the fiscal area. We approved the code of national accountability that has has it's had just a century. So this code first had a decree and reorganized all the accounting services of the public area. So in my opinion, this was very revolutionary for that time. I have no doubt that this code came after a very difficult economic crisis that Brazil didn't have the chance of reorganizing his debts with the exterior. So the general law of 4,320 is also an important law that came from the community of public servers, public accountants that presented a proposal that DSAP didn't accept at first, but after a deputy proposed in the Congress, and it has been there for 10 years, and it came right before the military dictatorship. Some votations that we had first, after the military regime, they were taken down by the Congress. So the Constitution from 1988 also innovated with a exclusive chapter for the deputation and budgets and for the public finances. In 20 years after, more or less 20 years after, we have the fiscal tax policy law, and which was a model to advance again, to innovate again, and to make this process of fiscal consolidation that more than only having a complementary law taking all this matter, we have one law that can treat that with consistency and coherence. Our program is not only to have more text in the constitutional law. We should have more matter, but they have to have logic. So they cannot just be there. Daniel mentioned here that sometimes we lack of efficiency, but sometimes it's not that. It's that we have contradictions in the same text, and that breaks some of our efficiency in the public service. So what we suggested in this text, in the list, we put in this last slide, and it's also in the TCU magazine. The proposal is to make an intimate pact so we can consolidate all in one project, one liability law project, so we can after clean up the text of the constitutional text, and so this way we can avoid some gaps. So I think now Brazil needs to take again the protagonism of fiscal matter innovation, and I think that the innovation can go to this way of the consolidation of taking everything in the same place, but also in the coherence and the consistency of the political impact. I thank you very much for hearing me. This presentation will be here available. You can take a look on that afterwards, and it can be interested for you, all of you. Thank you very much. We thank Professor José Roberto, Leonardo Ribeiro. This presentation was very instigative, and there is a great consensus first with our Minister Eder of this hyper-constitutionalization of the norms, the budgetary norms, and I believe that the incremental reform time has already gone, so we will need to revolutionize the public finances chapter. I would like also to congratulate for the time. We were very good at the timetable. We had 33 minutes of presentation, which is perfect for us. And now we will invite for the continuation and to moderate the next panel, the macro evaluation governmental from TCU, Ricardo Caldeira. Alessandro Caldeira. I would like first to greet the Vice President of the Union. I greet all those present here in the seminar too. In the second block of the first panel, we'll treat of this new code, the new public finances code. It's a project proposed in the House of Representatives, in the National Congress too. So, and we'll talk about this later. Eltonini will talk about it. He's an economist from the Brasilia University. He's a consultant in the House of Representatives from 2002, and between 2003 2007 he has worked on the International Monetary Fund. In 2016 he was the assessor for the President Temer. As I said, there is a proposal in the National Congress, more than one actually, that establishes general norms for the public finances regarding the plans and budgetary and budgets and the control for the budgets in the public administration for the articles 1363 and 165. So we have a financial law from 1964 that will complete 60 years, and we expect to not complete to 60 years, but it's possible that it happens. Actually, we say that it's in vigency. It's formally in vigency, but as Carlos Alberto mentioned, many norms and legal dispositives regarding the budget are regulamentated in these past times, especially through the LDO. So anyhow, I will pass the word to Paulo Biso and Toninho, that I think Paulo will start. Good morning, Alessandro. Good morning, all of you. I would first like to thank all the TCU for this initiative. It's a great honor to be here talking about this new 4,320 law from authority by the Alessandro Vieira Senator, the Deputy Tabata Amaral, and Felipe Rinoria. I'll try to share my presentation here. If I have any problem, I let you know.
Todos enxergam? Está aparecendo aqui para mim, mas não sei se para vocês. Se puderem confirmar, por favor.
Está sim, Paulo.
Ótimo, obrigado. É... Bom,
So a brief historic for this project. This initiative started in 2009 when we had 3 projects in the Federal Senate by the Senators Colombo, Jereissati, Casagrande. And from these projects, the one that what happened is that the project from Senator Jereissati is the one that prospered the most as the one to replace Senator Ferraço that in 2016. It was approved in the Senate and in the House of Representatives was assumed as a PLP 295 in 2016. In the same year, the Chamber created a special commission to analyze this bill, but this commission was never taken shape. So in August of the same year until February of 2016, the debate evolved, being led by a group from the executive power ordered by the civil house and that take this PLP 295 as a starting point, but advanced in some improvements in the Senate, in the text approved by the Senate. What happened is that 2022, it was taken as a base, not the PLP 295, but the result of this group of work in the executive work. And from that, some improvements were done in the project, and it culminated on the presentation of the PLP of 2022 in the cabinet of the senator previously mentioned. So now I would just like to mention more about the delta of contribution by the Minister of Project. So the starting point was a diagnosis that the Vigent mark has some concerns that are very important to take into consideration. There is a normative emptiness that is recurrent, being occupied by LDUs, which has been taken as permanent laws. Another problem is that the figure of PPA created by the Constitution of '88 has presented some historic inconsistency, which this is a very well-conceived tool, but it's very difficult to operationalize in a practical way. And also we have some pendency in a concept level to integrate the plans and the budgets. And also there is a sensation of deficit vis-a-vis with the best practices of the international public budgetary practices. So the director of this new model proposes a simplification of the budgetary laws, of the reduction of the budgetary laws. We have too many laws of the budgetary laws, so we are trying to reduce the number of it. The budgetary laws are those constituted in the PPA and the LDO and the LOA. So the new model, as I will expose next slide, is to reduce these 3 types of laws to 2. Also, another direction is to not duplicate these laws. Try to not repeat what is ELRF and delimiting the distinct fields of acting. Also, we are looking for a medium-term view to have a annual program to have a fiscal sustainability for the long-term projects. And also, what connects everything is our concern with the convergency for the best practices and the international standards, and of course, with the adaptation of these practices to the Brazilian reality. Just to illustrate, I will show here one point, the simplification of the Vigent framework with regarding the reduction of the budgetary loss with these two problems. The first is the conceptual pendency of how to integrate the plans and budgets and the deficit. So in synthesis, what's being proposed in the PLPV of 2022 is the PPA that always shows this crisis of the identity. His idea is to take the matter here and take to a government plan, and that is already existent in the Article 84 in the paragraph 11 of the Constitution of 1988. Our constitution is very planning-like, but never has had any of the projects regarding this topic. So the LDO, instead of taking this gap of a permanent law, it will become a medium-term expanded framework, the LTPF. So in Brazil, we are normally calling that the quadro de despesas médio prazo. So which will be in the area of the LDO that already is performing that, not in the ideal way, but it's already doing that. And the annual budgetary law will be with the annual vigency, but this vigency is in the pluriannual allocative framework. So we are going to look for to overcome a myopy in the budgetary allocability. So I will talk a little bit about the government plan that was mentioned before as a replacement for the pluriannual plan. So as it was conceived in the PLP 25, this plan will expose the country situation, defining some guidelines and goals and targets for the public administration. And this content will have together a nexus of long term. So the PPA is a medium-term tool. So here it will become a complementary as a long-term annexus that will take into consideration a development of a federal strategy that will be looking for being performed in minimum 10 years. It will be accompanied by the key national indicators. Also will be part of this annexes, long-term annexes, some long-term fiscal projections accompanied by the evaluation regarding the public debt sustainability. And also the third point is to have a legislative providence fiscal impact estimation. So this will be judged by what is necessary for the government plan that will be followed. So this should be reviewed at each year and presented to the chief of executive and the legislative power in solemn section. Another part of the project is that the idea of the project, the idea is that the legislative power in itself should be committed to this project, and it will present that to the National Congress in the beginning of the legislative section in a solemn way. That will be in February 2nd next year. That's something like the State of the Union in the United States, in which the executive chief goes to the Congress to present the proposal and to as a chief of the state, and goes to present to the state of nation. So in this new model, Some planning tools will be
Lembrando que quanto a isso,
the national plans, the regional and sectorial in development. When we talk about the
continuaria
plan, so all the plans that are already being gone through, they are still in vigency, but
plano de governo
we have just to consider them. Another thing that will be a tool is the public politics and the programs and the government plan.
sucedâneo do plano plurianual. É reforçada também a mensagem de que o processo de planejamento
The process of planning
subsidiado pelo processo de
should be after the evaluation process,
políticas e programas
the result of politics and programs, and also the social participation, making a commitment with the project, with the democratic regime.
outra questão
Another issue faced by this bill
vácuo normativo
is the lack of norms in the 174 article, this guideline that demands the fixation of guideline and basis to have a balanced national development was never regulated. So the bill intends to treat about these instruments and to seek the coherence and coordination of the several instruments. In this third article are very important words to the governance, the coherence of this planning. In the first part, the purpose of the fundamental goals in the third article of the Constitution of '88, which is the poverty eradications. It's very important. We know that country situations involves to have big dimensions. We have almost 20 million people in poverty. It's the size of Chile, and 60 million people in poverty like the Italy population. These projects reinforce the strengths of democratic regime, the development of the country, and the conciliation of the economical, social, and environmental dimensions. Sustainability of the environment cannot be out of this project. It's a modern project and is the center of this discussion. And we need to harmonize the accountability, fiscal and social accountability. As the President Minister of TCU in the opening of this event, fiscal accountability is a Republican theme and not ideological. So need to be connected to the social responsibility. This is the project vision. To end my speech, this bill wants to get close of the good practice known as project budgeting. It's not only about the concern with the balances. The accountability is put as something that we need to make. And on the other hand of the budgetary goal, we need to have quality in the public expense. So we understand with TCU about what are developed dimensions, the 5 E's of development: economicity, efficiencies, equity, effectiveness. We do not have the definition, but is to retext what is in the operational handbook of TCU. Since 1977, we built a consensus in TOSAI that the monitoring entity have to control the regularity but the financial audited and operational to evaluate the governmental actions. So this is the summary of the project. Colleen was in this debate since 2009. I was most recently in this project, and he is going to present the other points. Please, Tolini. Thank you, Paulo. I think I have the presentation. I'm going to present the most boring part in the sense that I have to give an overview of the project, topic to topic, and it's very long, so we have to have a little patience. This first chart, this first screen shows which the changes that we want to do in the law of budgetary guidelines. So the deadlines, if they're going to approved until the deadline, it could be valid. And the main issues are the attachment of fiscal goals, which should be replaced by the medium-term attachment. When we proposed that in 2009-16, when the project was approved in Senate, it made a huge difference in the sense that this attachment was very small. It was just a one-year attachment, and the next 2 years that the Constitution demands, LRF demands, was just a repetition of the first year. So we didn't have an effort in the medium term. It's just the repetition of we had in the first year. Nowadays, in the last 5 years, the fiscal goals attachment, it's more deep, and it is in a midterm fiscal scenario attachment. I think the fiscal scenario is more likely than attachment. The second news that I want to propose in this current presentation is the framework of the medium-term expand should be known as an attachment of LDO. When we talk about that, we're not creating something different, not anything new in terms of Brazil. From the development countries, members of OECD, almost all of them adopt that model. Only 3 of OECD don't have that, so it's not something new. What we did is to make a purpose based on these other countries' experience, because we have a huge diversity of solutions. None of the countries has the same model as the other, and we were inspired by the Switzerland model, which is a very well-known project since 90, after the economic crisis that Switzerland had. In that, we are going to have the establishment of individualized limits. In our conception, will be a unique limit to the legislative, executive, and after the executive branch, limit divided by themes. In Europe, we have a variety of different solutions. We have the ministry division, program division, by function division, and the team area, it's well adapted to Brazil. And in our case, we think that's a division that make the work easier of the National Congress, because the bill of the budgetary has been examined by that for a lot of years. To have an idea, I have some difficulty to change the slides. Okay. How it works? I'm sorry. I had two kinds of limits. The global limit, which is the fiscal, how much the country can expand, the primary expense in the time have to be 4 years. And so we have this global roof in a positive fixed by 3 years before. To give an example, in 22, I'm preparing the budget for 23, but the framework of medium-term deadline, we got the positive fixed to be expanded in 25 as 3.3. So that means that me in 22, with 3 years before, I should define what I need to expand in 23. And it could not be altered in LDU in the next year and not the year after that. So we cannot change the positive value that was defined now, because they have to have this medium-term characteristic. We're not working on that. We are going to work again with short-term. The individual terms, they not need to have this definition with this time horizon, so that time before. It's just the year that refers the LDO. For example, coming back a few months before, the LDO 223 defined the sectorial limits of the branches inside the executive. And the bill of budgetary law that was taken to these years should respect these limits by the federal law. There is an issue of transition, because we have a current rule about the fiscal regime where if we put that, the transition should be very easy to keep the current systematic until the bill of 26. But before the bill 24, we could put the indicators of the global roof to 27. And the bill to 25, we could define what's the expended value to 27. In this transition, in the guidelines and budgetary guidelines, I could change, and this change could make only by 27. So it's a soft transition with transparency, make before, do not put the market in risk. We could do that very softly. Some points that we are purpose in the annual budgetary law. The first thing is the incomes, which is always an issue. But eventually, we think that the Congress has to be free to have incomes credited. It's the practice in Brazil. But if the Congress identify the ads of incomes, these ads could be reserved to the contingent reserve during the execution of budget. The other important point that has to do with the purpose that we are building, linked to budget amendment, which is not the object of this presentation, is the point of the allocation, exclusive reserve. This is a Brazilian thing. I do not know another country which the executive branch has to give the public expense, so this allocation could be made by the Congress. So the executive sacrifice so the Congress could increase the expense and do not indicate where they're going to have the incomes for that. So it's the inversion of the logics of the world budgetary. When one proposes, the other approves. Another point is the public debt. We are propose that it could be open by a decree of the executive branch. As we understand, there's not a necessity to have the same process of the other expense. So it has an important rule of the TCU because we are putting between the principles of the clarity. What that means that when the executive branch fixes the amount of debt, the taxes or amortization, that this value has to be inside the fidelity principle. Nowadays, the executive tends to superestimate because of the necessity to have creditors if you don't have enough dotations for that. So that are conjugates. Who has the rule to say if it's the same as it happened in the years is the TCU when they examine the annual accounts. We have the deadlines of LOA. We are keeping the deadlines, but we are anticipating to December the 50th. And the municipality and states, we are doing that by steps. They have 15 September, the municipality 30th of September 30th to link at that of the superior entity. Some points related to the expense execution. We have the phases of executions where proposed that the bodies has the freedom to create, to add another phases if they want. We are proposing the parcels in 12 months. And we have an international agreement. There is no hypothesis to not pay the debt. Related to the public funds, the bill defines what's a public fund, disciplines the institution, what are the demands, establish the periodic validation of that, and have to keep or extinct the public funds. And if I have a extinction proposed, we are going to have the individual procedures for that. Related to the qualitative classifiers is a very important point, and several times we have a resistance on that. There is a bad impression that's not correct, that we're going to have a loss of transparency, and I think it's the opposite, what we are looking for. Our idea is just to remain the bills in the budget law, the classifiers that we call as qualitative, which are the fundamental ones in a governmental sphere: institutional, programmatics, functional, economics, and linked. These classifiers, all of them are in all of the countries. Here in Brazil, we have the sphere and the vinculation of incomes. Not many countries has, but we think that's very important. The other classifiers, which are technical classifiers, were categorized as auxiliary classifiers. They should be in the relational data in the federal case. And what classifiers are that? Element, modality, and primary result. The other classifier could be considered as auxiliaries. In the federal case, the use and donations of credit operations should be in the CF. And we think that all the entities could create auxiliaries classified that they think it's convenient. Our goal is to clean the budgetary law. The Brazilian budgetary law is the one that presents the most polluted visual. There is no other law that had so many classifying columns as ours. That means that nowadays we have a loss of transparency. The common citizenship that's not a budgetary consultant, TCU technician, works in the treasury. The common citizen could not understand our budgetary law. They don't have an idea of what's that. So from the moment that we are going to clean that, we think that the common citizen could be more understandable. In the public accountability, we have this issue how the norms could be managed and proposed. We have some actors, STM, CGF, the Brazilian norm rules, and in this work group, as Paulo mentioned, it was very discussed, so we have this solution that beyond the norms that are in this bill, which is general rules, the complementary supplementary norms should be proposed by the national treasurers and applied to all the entities, but they have to be approved by CGF. So the importance of the future CGF that is not installed yet, so hearing the members to approve or not the proposed norms by treasurer. The convergence in the international standards of norms. So it established general rules about the reports, the actions, how the notes can be done. There is a demand about that, which is very not well explained. So the bill is about the national consolidation of the accounting information. What was resolved by the Amendment 108 of 2020. Related of the control, costs, and evaluation, first about the control, intern and extern, the social control, we did not change much. We just specified the functions of the internal control. About the external control, we want to preserve the institutional space that already exists. The TCU has his own laws. There's no necessity in the supplementary law for us to get in conflict with the law of TCU. Several colleagues of TCU back related to that. We are open in the future when we have the reports about that, we can change. And we have the rights of the citizens to access to account information related to the costs. We put the entities to generate periodical information so we can evaluate and also allowed in this way to compare between different objects. Different bodies, the same expense, wise the different values between the entities. related to the public politics. We have to monitoring and evaluate in a systematic ways based in the technical criteria. They cannot, how it's happened in Brazil, never being evaluated and always discontinued. They don't know if they are efficient or not. Related to Leonardo and Zé Roberto mentioned the spelling review. We proposed in 16, it was proposed in the Senate. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. But the discussion, we had that discussion since that time, and we established the periodical review once every 4 years, and this evaluation should be in the budgetary law bill. So in 22, the last LDO should have an attachment represent the review of the public expending. So why put that on the LDO? Is our idea in April to follow this bill, this discussion of public expense could base the candidate debates to elective positions, the debates of the runners to the presidency. If we have this position in the government, in the last year of mandate, they can discuss that. The IFI of National Congress. It's not about to extend if from the Senate, which was well done experience, but to reinforce this instrument, this organization, IFI, and could be with all the National Congress and not only Senate, and has their basis in a supplementary law and not an internal resolution of the Senate. Related to IFI, we have 2 pages of rule about this new IF, and the main one is for us to predict the transition to the IF to the National Congress. I have a last screen. We want to close before 40. I don't know if I can mention or if I leave to questions. We have some reflections by the future proposed. What we are taking out of this bill. Why? Because these points, they're not mature enough in Brazil's discussion, so we can propose them. So we prefer to not put that on the bill, so it was not difficult to the process of the project. The first point is about the impositive budget. We think that this could be an obstacle for the process. All the previous proposals since the 90s of modification of the 4320 law went stopped because of the impositive budget. When we proposed that without the fiscal accountability, the executive branch said we do not accept to discuss that. So all the bills stopped by that. And beyond that issue, we have the incomes and also budgeted incomes and budget expense. We think that incomes that belongs or shared by with other entities by the Constitution should be in the LOA. Why they are in the national budget? Theoretically, these just are transactions of treasure. And there's not a necessity to be in the budget if you have a way to preserve as we have in the TCU website, all the historic of that, in the Treasure website. And the other point related to
Será que a dívida,
the
o refinanciamento deve ser considerado uma despesa? Será que deve constar da LDO?
should be that
Vamos encarar isso como uma transação de tesouraria.
in the budget law, and that should be in the treasure cost, not to transit in the budget. Because when we talk about what's the value of the budget, we consider trillions, but 1/3 of that is just to refinance the debts.
A questão dos projetos plurianuais.
The multi-year project. Everybody knows about the undone works. We have an annually budget, and we want to keep that in the medium term. The framework of the expanded stays annual, but the authorization nowadays, we are just authorizing fractions of works. When I'm going to build a bridge, they authorize the value in the beginning of the work, and then we could not end our works. So the validity of that, is it worth to approve the multi-year just one time and approve the total cost, and then it's going to be executed for the year like the other countries do, like the United States, or we are not mature to do that? If we going to approve that for the next years, if we do not have an accountability linked to that. And the last point to end my presentation is the budgetary law and the limits of payment. Several countries in the world, this budgetary law is not a limitation to the it's a model of a simple competence model. It's a different model. At the same time that our law of the fiscal result, we consider another forms of payments. So when we do a decree of, we do that with two limits. The commitment, so we just work with you. So our issues that are to the future, to other generation to discuss. Thank you very much to you all.
Thank you, Gnau. Thank you, Tonini. Excellent presentation. I just forgot to mention in the beginning that Paulo and Tolini, they are in charge of the writing the text of this bill. So if anyone has any complaint, you know who to look for. I believe that, as I mentioned previously, our criteria today is the law 4,320. We have to recognize the merits of this law, which is the cohesion of these laws in a overall. If you see the annexes of this law, we can see this cohesion in all the aspects. The unity of the budget, the roles between the budget and the accountability. Some previous projects that were presented, they didn't get this cohesion compared to this law. But this project did. It maintains a cohesion, especially bringing some emphasis very important to the law, that is 4,320, that is the planning. We don't have this planning in the law. It's a part that it's important and essential to be dedicated for a good functioning of a system that has some fiscal limits. because the needs and desires are always limited to the availability of the public resources. I would underline in this proposal, just to summarize, is this emphasis on the planning, the revision of the public expenses, which is essential to maintain a rationality on the budgetary allocation, especially in moments of fiscal scarcity. And in the presentation, everyone also talked about politics, and I think it's important to mention these future reforms. I agree that some questions are not mature enough to be expressed in a project now. Maybe the problem of the annual expense could come in, but I don't know. The question that Tonin mentioned, that in terms of the of income and budgetary expenses, what should be considered? Here in the Parliament, we have been preparing for this question, and it's a challenge to understand what can and what should be in the budgetary plan. So this is a very good reflection that he proposed in the end. So we will go to a moment of debate. I have some questions, and I believe that also Daniel has some questions regarding the first block. But I understand that some ministers are here, and so I would like to see if you have some questions for those who have presented have had the presentations before. So, Alexander, I wanted to say something. First of all, Roberto Afonso mentioned a very important thing, which is the hyper inconstitutionalization would not be a problem if we had something very well structured, clear, that could give us all the guidelines. But the amendment that supposedly transformed all the budget as impositive mentions a duty to be accomplished. So the problem is not the hyper-constitutionalization, but the lack of consistency, structure, and coherence in everything that has been mentioned so far. I would like also to remember that in 2009, many discussions were done by a deeper reflection on the budgetary system, and it was presented a PEC by Senator Garibaldi, the PEC 27 of 2009, that we were taking into consideration at that moment. That discussion of not having 3 laws, but only 2. One that was called the budgetary plan, that is being used for this discussion right now, and that was brought that moment, and that people didn't consider as important at that time to be discussed. And Tolini brought into consideration a very important point, which is the complexity of working with several matters at the same time and to have a reasonable consensus among them. I remember the PL 135 that brought some conditions for the proposals of positive proposals for the budget, so it didn't work out. So one question that could be interesting, Zé Roberto, is how can we overcome this difficulty, this political difficulty to make substantial changes in our budgetary process? The impositivity is already constitutionalized. It should be actually better disciplined. And now we can question the legality without this regulatory law that doesn't exist. So we have a insufficiency of regulation that point out to extreme difficulty, not only to a pluriannuality of projections, but also a pluriannual budget in some matters that is very complex and it's very sensitive, even for the public works. So there are parts that are very important and that we need to uh, overcome the political debates and go against the system. If you cannot overcome these difficulties, we can just regulate matters that are already consensual, but they can just stop us to reach the big targets that we are aiming to. So, at last, in my book that I wrote as a fruit of my dissertation work on the budgetary laws, because there is not much literature regarding that, the subtitle was going back to the origins, because LDU does many things, but what was discussed in the Congress in the beginning. So the LDO was first conceived as not as a complete recipe that was finished, but it was constructed with the time. So now we have to understand how the constitutionality should be included there. In the LDO, you cannot just put any matter there that you can regulate the public finances. So many things that are there may be unconstitutional because it's put into a law that is not with a normal tramitation, and because of it, it's not any matter that could be just included in this law. So the chapter of this law is discussed the juridical question to provide the enforcement of this public political law. So so that it can follow the Portuguese laws that that have the power of orientate and give directions to other laws, but they cannot just treat any matter that we want to. So this is the time to review all this process and to bring to the budgetary complementary law, which is an important point, to see whether everything that's in LDO could be in a complementary law or even in an annual budgetary law, because many of the guidelines that are in the annual budgetary law could be in the LDO. So we have a principle of exclusivity nowadays that is very well respected, but it's not respected in the LDO. So this is a question that we can debate afterwards, and we can debate that later, even though I wanted to do that right now, but we can do that later. Thank you very much. Procurator Rodrigo, I believe that has any other questions. After I can pass it over to the other panelist. Thank you very much, Alessandro. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to felicitate President Bruno Dantas, Leonardo Benais, Thiago Dutra for the organization, and the panelists, Leonardo Ribeiro, José Afonso, Paulo Bicho, for the presentation. It's a great pleasure to hear you and learn something from you that is very interesting and that I am always interested of. Regarding the proposals, both initiatives are interesting, and Leonardo Ribeiro has already had the opportunity to explain me the question of the code, and I think it's a very well traced strategy to solve the problem of the coherence and this pulverization of the financial law of the constitutional amendments that sometimes are way too easy to be altered in the reality of the legislative game. So, and the robustness of the work from Elio and Paulo in this code, a work that, as it was exposed, has been discussed and thought regarding the reality of Brazil, and has been matured and reinforced, and certainly has a content that should be taken to the deliberation of the Congress, and is a topic that is in lack of modernization, that the law of 64 doesn't allow the normatization of the LDO, and this is not reasonable and doesn't bring not even any perspective, confiability to the continuation of the law that can be changed. That So I would like to bring some questions here to Paulo and Hélio, because to regards the project they have presented some details, and the first question is, what are the global limits for 3 years long term? If we had the efficiency of this rule today, that would be positive from 2023 until 2025. So how do you see the appropriation and the political commitment from a possible new government that could be elected? So we are in a election year, so the president is working, but we can also think about this possible new governor. So, what is the risk that we could have also to having alteration that can make this impositivity not very credible? The other question is regarding the transition from the new fiscal regime to the medium-term project, because we had an alteration last year, the Amendment 113 that changed the limit of the roof expenses, and so that's something that we should consider in this transition of the fiscal regime. So facing this amendment 113 and looking at this transition, we should discuss a constitutional amendment. Do you think that this is necessary or not? How do you see that? And our last point is, as Elio mentioned, as a topic to be discussed in a future way, we would like to think about the pluriannual expenses. So it's just a question that I have regarding the paragraph 14 and the article 65 from the law 102 in 2009. So that would not be a constitutional decision, but it would be a very robust decision to advance better in the regulation in a bill of public finance. So do you think that this is related to that? I'll pass to Zé Roberto and Paulo and Hélio to answer these first questions. And after we can come back, because Daniel has some questions too. I don't know if I can start, especially the question mentioned by Minister Weber. If you allow me, I tell that I'm participating in the process of LRF. I think that we should repeat the process, not the law. Because, for example, before the President of Republic, he sent us a law, he published that in a national dialogue, and we had the opportunity to work on this phase, and we had several meetings with the civil entities, especially because the county and the county and the federal treasury were working there. So the project of the TF has not much to do with the project we are working with. It changed the project we are working, but in regarding the executive perspective, it was done to aprimorate a presentation and to increase several other devices that were not contemplated in the original project. Some these devices they were uh, regarding some they were proposed by some representatives from the opposition, and it was accepted. So I think that we need to repeat this process of dialogue. In my opinion, it's true that we should have these legislative projects, and we still are having better projects each time more. But I think that we need to make a political pact between the powers, involving the different spheres of government, so that we can understand what is the minimum that all of us we accept. And from that minimum, we can transform it in amendments or in laws, our proposal of code, or whatever it is. I don't think there is not an action pact. There are some works being done together, but like the executive power is less worried and the legislative is a little more worried, but they are not working together. Because sometimes we see that there is a law being approved by positivity, but the complementary law that is ensuring the application of this law is not being approved. And then we see that the executive is not approving, but is accusing the judiciary power to be messing with the executive power in other terms. So I think that we lack of a pact, we lack of a work together, and I don't think it's difficult. So we need to first understand what's the minimum we have to accept, and first agree on that, and from that we go to the execution. I think that when we talk about this pact, we have to understand that sometimes it's people they just approve it because they do not have to vote afterwards on the complementary law. So the pact should be global. It should be concerned to what everybody agreed of, and that should be transformed into practice and brought to the different legislative means. We know how to do that, and we should do that again, that we have lost on the years, in these past years. And I am very optimistic in a technical way. We are very competent, but sometimes we are not just making the political part of being diplomatic between all the parts. We already have a lot of things that have been worked out here in Brazil, even much better than in other parts of the world, but the only problem we have now is this lack of coherence and cohesion in the text, so we need to work on that. Tolini, Paulo would like to comment any other thing here or not? Paulo would like to talk? So, Rodrigo, I will start with the problem of the pluriannuality, because in general terms, many ideas that were mentioned in this PRP until it was approved in the Senate, and after in the work groups done by the executive, many of the ideas brought there, they were migrated to the Constitution. Many of these amendments that were proposed, and in my opinion, in some cases, they were a very uh, precipitated migration. So, what is in the Constitution today is that we have information of these pluriannual projects, but there is not a substantial change that is put in my reflections that would be to authorize these projects all at once. So this authorization is done at each year, and the Constitution mentions that we should just be accountable of that in the subsequent years. So we don't have to. There is not a normative that's following that. So the amendments should be very well thought, because the risk in Brazil is that you want to approve everything, and then you get committed with the future budget, and you don't have any future space that you can approve any other amendments in the future. So that's important to notice. The other point you mentioned is the migration for the uh, fiscal regime. So you mentioned that there was not that fiscalization of the law that was at each 10 years, and you notice that our framework for the introduction of the law will be in 2027, which will be the first year after this 10-year phase. So that would make sense to make the migration in this form. But from the moment this 10-year law doesn't exist anymore, so it doesn't matter when there will be this replacement. So what we maintain is that to have a replacement that will be ordered and foreseen with anticipation, we should do the implementation, but put the value of the rooftop into 3 years. So it doesn't matter if it is 2027, 2028, or even 2026. So regarding your question, which was the hardest, the first one regarding the political commitment, we can have an answer on that. We know our country, we know the difficulty that we have on this topic. We have a Congress that much part of the time it doesn't have this fiscal responsibility culture, but in the moment that we have problems, the Congress really worked with us. It was like that when we approved the LRF, and when we had the rooftop of expenses approved. So in the other moments, the Congress is not doesn't have a culture of working with us. So you are right when you say that we have to think how are we going to manage the uh, government replacement, and how can you connect the new government, and how the new government will accept the limit established by the previous government. There's a way to fix that without lose the credibility of the rule. A way that we discussed among us would be that in the first year of mandate, in the case that a president is assuming again, but it's a new president, this new president could make a proposal for changes in the LDO that was approved in the previous year. He could propose new limits for the upcoming years, and in this way he will be making a proposal to be approved in the National Congress. In this way would be a way of reviewing this roofs in such a way that we can have the possibility of the Congress to approve that. So the president will not have the freedom to just adjust everything that he wants. So he cannot just fix that to 50% more in budget. So just finish the answer. Our model is based on what they do in Sweden, because Sweden has many similarities in the fiscal management, because it's the only country in the world that has a law to uh, budgetary guidelines that comes from Brazil, and they are very alike to us. So in that's why we have this possibility of implement changes they do there here in Brazil. But there is a very big difference between them and us, which is the difference of the fiscal responsibility that they have there, because they have a higher perception of the fiscal responsibility as a value for the society. So the society there, when the government changes the budget, so the change doesn't happen because the government proposes, but it doesn't happen because if any party or if the government proposes that to the society, it doesn't get re-elected. So for their culture, that is very important. So that's why they avoid to make changes. In Brazil, this doesn't happen. It will not change in the next 20 years. So this is something that we need to live with, this reality, and adapt to our difficulties. Leonardo, did you raise your hand? I would like to take advantage of speech of all of you, Mr. Eder, Professor José Alfonso, Tolini, Procurator Rodrigo, to complement what Roberto mentioned. Beyond the dialogue that's necessary in this process of changes, I believe it's fundamental a discussion regarding the legislative power and access to the fiscal area. I mentioned here the article from Senator José Serra. He wrote the chapter of the Constitution, and he underlines in this text, in that context of democracy and coming from a dictatorship to a democracy, the legislative power came very strongly in the fiscal policy area, the budgetary area, and etc., to promote alterations in a mixed system that the legislative could be participating on the budgetary process. So in my observation that I've made previously, I think that the point here is the coherence. This term here should be in this reform we will make, because as I showed you, the OECD has already highlighted that the more incoherent systems, the ones that do not pay attention to the OECD guidelines, they have more facility to have crisis, more expenses. So the participation of the National Congress and the legislative power is fundamental. So when you look at the American Congress, which is a presidentialist regime, just as we have. So in their model,
that changing indicators, this was in the 60s, the specific committee to discuss the key national indicators. There is a committee in the National Congress specifically to that, congressional, but it's products, IFI American. There's not a bill that is in the Congress, American Congress, with other products. There is a cohort of expand, but they have like a score. They give grades to these bills. We brought this innovation in the independence issue, so it's in the bill and the Congress IFI, and imagine the importance of the independent institution in the National Congress environment. So we can see that strains the process, fixes mandates, and on budgets. In the bill, as Senador Serra, to have the periodic review of expense, we had something that created a committee in the National Congress linked to the fiscal accountability and the evaluation of public expense. We have the several commissions on that. So I think we have to have a specific committee and with a political representation with parliament members, but linked to the specificity to evaluate issues that it's linked to the evaluation of the public expense. We have that, or the consultants working with that, so I think you have to have a dedicated commission work on that. Accountability in the Sweden Congress, it's a positive point. So I think you have to discuss this issue, especially in the context where the Congress is getting bigger recently, not only with the report amendments. Minister Weber put the amendment of 2019. When I was at SOF, I worked in an amendment talking about the American model of the budgetary in the American system. They do not have a decree that do not goes through the Congress. Congress participates on this process. So we have to discuss the legislative role in the fiscal field so we can have a better coherence in the presentation. We said the issue of the budgetary process to approve a fiscal code, and we see that we have a process that's more hard through the process and not the amendment. We cannot have two bills in the legislative houses. We have a specific commission to treat the theme. The deadline, the longer deadline for the amendment, but the problem is that could be changed as a supplementary law, so it has an incoherence. So to approve is hard, and to to change is not difficult. So this process as a whole should have inside a hard legislative process. So it could be a current law, and you could not easily change this law through the years. So I think that's it. That's my contribution about the qualification of the process. Thank you, Leonardo. We are going to end, unfortunately. We have some questions. Daniel also had some questions, but the debate was very good. It's a very good opportunity, but we need to end. And then I'll give the floor to Daniel to make their final considerations and close this morning part. And in the afternoon, we are going to start at 2 p.m. Brazil. And to make my final consideration, I would like to thank the participation of José Roberto Afonso, Paulo Ribeiro, Ayrton Min, that were very good presentations, a very good debate. I thank the participation of Minister Vedder in this part of the debate. It's, in my point of view, it's very mature. And the issue now is to make the bills, the ideas to advance and could be approved. I thank you, and I pass the floor to Daniel. Your final considerations, please. I would like to thank the invitation, the opportunity to join this event, to congratulate the speakers, the four big reference to me. I also hope that this debate go forward. I see some consensus. The first one, that's the current frameworks, is unsustainable. And this, it's a start point, it's fundamental. As I said, there's not space to put more things in the constitutional text. According to the last changes in the past years, here we had access to two proposals which were very important, and for sure we're going to be in the debate, in a discussion, focus in the legislative role. So I would like to thank for the opportunity and to close this morning period and wish you good work of this in this event in the afternoon.